Hey guys, this is Purna. Today we are going to discuss about components. Basically, this is a continuation of our previous session, and we can say it's a part 2. So far, we talk about basic JavaScript class, object, then differences between the class function. We talk about constructor, component. We learn more about class component. Then we use events, method, prop, state. Also, we have used few lifecycle method in class component. And finally, we will take countdown timer app as part of our example using class component. So if you want to watch that session, then you can see the link in the description. So today we will focus more on the function component, and the right side part that you are seeing here, like the function component, we'll use events, methods, props, state in function component, and we will also try to use the lifecycle methods using hooks. So normally the lifecycle methods are not available in function component, so using hooks we have to achieve it. And finally, we will convert that previous example of countdown timer, which was built on class component, into functional component. So let's go through functional components. So a function component pretty easy to define, and it is just a simple JavaScript functions that returns a React element. It takes an argument called props. And props you already know, right? So props stands for the properties in class component. Basically, through hooks we can achieve whatever the things are available in class component. So there are two ways of creating functional component, using the function keyword or using the arrow function. So this is what one code snippet of functional component, so that you can see, right? So we are writing like function greeting so on. So props that I said, like we get an argument on an object, and whatever the data we pass from the parent component to child, so those things we can get it in the props. And it's just simple returning a HTML element, okay, React element also you can see. So this is another example of writing function component using arrow functions that you can see, right? So const greetings to within the function parameters that we are passing props, and the rest of the things are same. Okay. So the using methods, props, and states in function component, right? So props are like as we already discussed this. This is the way that we can pass data from the parent component to child component. This is properties. And states is like something which gives the data for the lifespan of the component. And we can achieve this state kind of behavior using useState hooks, basically. And this is one example of using state that you can see, right? The useState. And here is a method also, right? So that log event is a normal method. And in the on-click event of the button, basically we are calling this log event, and log event is updating the counter. Basically, it's setting a state. So if you see this line of const count, set count, useState props, right? So this is the state variable, and this is the setter method of state variable. So whenever you want to update the value of the state, then we have to use this, and we can use useState to initialize the state variable. So this properties or parameters that we are passing, this is the default initialized value for the state. And how can you use this state variable? So that in counter that we can see, right? With count, it's a state variable that is used. Okay. So let's go to Visual Studio and we'll see how things looks like. Created a component called my function component. It's basically a function component, and so as usual, like you have to import the React library along with the useState. This is the hook to get the state features basically. So in the first line that you can see inside that function component, line number 4, so I have created a session variable that is called count, and the way we used to define this state variable, like the first argument is the state values variable, the second one is setter method, the next one is like we are using the hook to initialize our state value. So this parameters what we are passing props.start, basically it's a default value that we used to pass, so initial value. And this is a example of arrow function. So this my function component expect a props object, and this const log event that you are seeing, it's a user defined method, it's also arrow function. Inside this method we are increasing the state counter, right? So set count within bracket we are passing count plus 1, so it's always increase 1 whenever this particular function is called. So here you can see we have a button on click event that we are calling this log event, and every time it will call, it will increase count 1 value to the state value. And in this h1 tag that we are showing the counter actual values. So this is the state that we are binding using the React expression. So let's see the code how it looks like, the render output. So if you refresh it, you will see by default it is counter 0 because we have passed that start properties as 0. So if you click on this, it will increase 1 by 1. Okay, now let's come to the PPT. So lifecycle methods using hooks in function component. So class component have all lifecycle method to perform the actions for different stages of component. But in function component, we don't have those methods available, like that component did mount, or you can see the component did update. So these kind of methods are not available. So we can still achieve those kind of functionalities using useEffect hook. So as we earlier learned about useState hook for availing the state feature, right? So in using the useEffect, we can get the activities, or we can perform the activities on the lifecycle event kind of things. So this is something I have written my handmade note, that you can see what are the class component method that can be used through the can achieve through the hooks basically. So if you can see here, like the component did mount, this is basically called when the component is mounted. So we can achieve the similar things. It's just like a page load kind of event, right? If you have something .NET, ASP.NET kind of things. So here we have useEffect function, and first parameter of this useEffect call is a callback function. So we are passing a callback function, and second is the dependency, second parameter. And whenever you have a useEffect and the second parameters is just like square bracket, right? So without passing any dependency, it calls once when the component is mounted. So there is one more, like component did update. So it's updated values, right? So whenever we change anything in the React component, so the corresponding component change trigger this component did update event basically method. So that things we can achieve through useEffect also. So as like if you are calling this useEffect without passing this second parameter, right? Just simple the callback function. So this will call every update, right? So if you want to call your function at every update, anything in any particular element, then you just keep it like this. So there is a parenthesis missed here. So don't pass any argument, even the blank also, right? So in that case, it will call every time like this. But if you want to call something when there is a particular dependency updated, then you can pass a dependencies variable here. Let's say I'll put something as per my previous example, right? Let's say counter. So if I use a count variable here, then it will only update when you change to that particular count state. Okay, so if you see the comments also I've written, so runs if any dependency changed basically. And this the dependency, it's an array basically. We can pass n number of dependencies, so based on their change it will execute. And the third one is component will unmount. So it is called when component is unmounted, right? So so that is similar like the first one, right? By passing a blank object, blank element in the second argument. So here also we are passing the blank element, but it has an additional return statement inside it, like return function that you can see, anonymous function. So this will call on the onmount, right? The component onmount. Yeah, here's the example of using different useEffect that I explained. I just modified that previous example for function component and created a new component called FC hook check. Here the same counter, but I have also added one more button called click to change the color, changing the background color based on the flip color state. Okay, so if you see there is a state called flip color and set flip color true false. So if it is true, then light pink color is expected in the background of this button, and if it is false, then light green color, right? And whenever I'm clicking on this button, it will toggle this values. Okay, so when it is false, then it will be true. If it is true, it will be false on the click. So let's see how things are looking. So before that, I have just commented out other hooks, and I just kept only the useEffect hook with the blank second parameters. So let me see how this is looking. Basically I'm printing in console, so I have to open the console here. So when I'm loading this page, you can see the counter initial is 0, right? It is called. But when I am clicking on this or changing anything or any activities on this state, so by default it is calling to that counter initial that you can see in the useEffect has been written, the counter initial and the starting start count, right? So it is basically 0, right? So it is printing 0. But when I'm performing any action in this component, let's say I'm clicking on this button, I'm changing the color by clicking the button, so nothing is called. It means that is only called when it is mounting. Okay, now let's see. Let me uncomment the second one. So the second one will call when the dependent count is changed. Okay, basically it has the dependency to the count state. Let's see how it is behaving here now. So by default, when the page is loading, it is calling to the counter click because the state is changed basically. So let me clean it off. And when I'm clicking on this, right, so you are seeing the counter is clicked. So if you go and see the useEffect, the second one, it has the dependency, right, that it is calling when counter is the button is clicked to change the counter values, right? So basically the console, it is logging this. Now let me uncomment the second one. So this will be like as there is no any second argument here, so it's expected it will call every time, right? So let me refresh this page, and whenever I'm clicking on this, it is changing the counter click basically. So let me comment out this to useEffect on top. Basically we have already looked into it, and let's skip the below one. So the expectation is it will call every time irrespective of any button click. Like the previous one was called when the counter was updating, and the first one was called when the page is loading, or sorry, component is loading, right? The third one is expected it will call every time because it is it doesn't have any dependencies defined. So let me refresh this page. Okay, so this counter check is the text we have written inside this console log, and it is showing the counter value, right? So let me click on this. So when I am clicking on this click me, the counter check again calling because it is updating the state of the counter. Okay, so when I am clicking on the button 2, like click to change color, so it is not updating the counter, but it is changing the color of the this button background basically. So it updates the toggle, right? That flip colors. So whenever I'm clicking on this, it is also checking that counter check. It means it will call every time. So let's move to the next slide. Yeah, so here we'll be building a timer, countdown timer app using the function component. So basically we are going to update that existing class component timer to function counter, so that it will be very easy for you guys to see the difference. Okay, this is the timer that we are going to build. The header would be like timer using FC, and this is hours, minutes, and the second. Okay, so let's go to the Visual Studio Code. So I have created a component here. You can see, right, function comp timer, and already I have the timer set up. So what I can do, right, so this is just a copy paste basically. I'm just copying from the class component timer into this function comp timer. So let me change this component name, function comp timer, and I have to use useState. Let me call useState, and useEffect. These two hooks I have to use. So I don't need to do all these things now. Let me remove this extend statement, and let me use the arrow function. So I like to use arrow function instead of the conventional way of creating function props. So this is converted to my function component. Okay. So we don't need this constructor. This constructor, all these things comes in class component only, right? So what I can do, right, I'll have to create these three states basically. Okay. So how can we create that? Const square bracket start. This will be like hours, set hours, then useState, and the starting value 0. Okay. So likewise, I have to copy this 2 times to have minutes and second state as well. Okay, same for the seconds also. Okay, so I don't need all these things. So yeah, in the class function component, to create a function, we don't need to bind it how we used to do in class component, right? So let me remove this piece of code. This is not relevant now. Okay, so this function is created. Let's get time. Let's get time, and we don't need this. Just simply pass props dot deadline, and do we need it? No, we can simply pass. So why we will create one more variable that's not required at all. Okay, set hours, just create set hours. For set minutes, let me copy this. Call this setter method of seconds to assign that value. Okay. So I don't need this dot set state because it's not required in function component. So we already get the setter method using hooks. Okay, my function is ready. So this is required when the component is mounted, right? So how can we use that? But we have something called useEffect. useEffect. The first parameter is an anonymous function, or a callback basically. We can pass an anonymous function, and here we are going to use this. Okay, so we are using this useEffect here to replace this component did mount. Okay, and you don't need to use this anymore here. It is directly accessible, and the props dot deadline also I am using, right? So you have to pass the initial values that we are passing. So we don't need this code anymore, so we are just removing it. So instead of this dot state dot hours, so we can simply access the hours and minutes, and then seconds. Okay, I think this is done. So function component timer. Okay, let me run this program and we'll see how things are working. So I need to change in index.js also. So I have to call this component like import function component timer. Okay. And here let me copy this. So I'll be using this function component timer. Now let me comment it out. And let me change in app.js also. So I'll be using this timer here. And let's see there is a error also came. Render is not a function. Okay, so basically in this function component for function component timer, that render is not a valid statement, so I can simply use return. Okay, so just remove this piece of code. So you got it right, how we can convert a class component, because these are the things are no more required in function component. And if you go and see the browser, that you can see, right? This is my component is ready. So initial values I am passing the 5 minutes. So our component is ready now. And if you want to go through the code one more time, let me show you what are the things I have moved here. So I changed the name of this function and the way used to declare, because it was extending a class component, and I had to use useState and useEffect to use the session and the lifecycle method kind of things, right? So using useEffect, I use a few state variable for hours, minutes and seconds, and also we don't need a constructor basically, so I have to remove it, and we don't need this kind of keyword, so we can simply access its data member inside this function. So here we are using this dot set state, so that is not required, so we can directly use the setter method of this state variable. And component did mount is replaced with useEffect, and here we don't need the render function, so we remove that render method and we simply returning it. And for accessing the state, you don't need to use this dot state dot the state variable, so just simple I'm using hours, minutes and second. So this is how you can convert the class component into function component. And I will leave this code snippet, guys, in the description of this video, so that you can go and check that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this session. Basically I tried to explain the class component and the prerequisite side of using class component, like class, functions, object of JavaScript. Then today I explained everything about function component, like how can you use props, how can you use event functions, how can you use the hooks, by using hooks like state that we have used. So we have used useEffect to get the kind of functionalities in the lifecycles methods in class component, and we did a couple of programming also, and finally we convert our countdown timers which was built on class component into functional component. So I hope you guys enjoyed this session. That's all for today. Thank you guys. I'll come with some other topic in our React trainings. So you can do one thing, like please subscribe my YouTube channel Techie Purna, and follow me on Instagram. Just give feedback how these sessions are going on, and if you have any questions, just ask me in the comment sections. I will respond it. Thank you guys.